I hope you all had a nice week off and that your return from spring break is off to a good start. I just kind of want to check in for a moment, let you know, you should have maybe seen online that I had to go in and manually grade questions 31 to 41, I think, ish, on everyone's midterms. And so those have been manually graded. That was all the short answer and, open-ended kind of response questions. So what you see in the grade book for that then is your final midterm score. And at this point, the only thing we have outstanding is that last lab that you turned in on personal care assignments. I did not get to that over the break, but I will get those graded shortly. And then I want to sort of lead into class. We're going to be talking today about ABC analysis, what that looks like, what it relates to in the classroom, and lots of specifics around that. So I want to sort of direct your attention to the upcoming ABC analysis assignment. And I believe if I share my screen here, can you all see the course page? Okay, so we're in week 9. Looking ahead under week 10, you've got class materials for 322, and the ABC analysis assignment is posted here. You are welcome after today, after you have a little bit of context for ABC analysis, to start working on it. I'm going to kind of show you, talk you through, the expectations of this assignment. But it's sort of chunked into 3 parts. And so don't wait till the last minute to do it. It will take you a little bit of time. And it is going to be due here by the end of this week 10. So March 27th, I believe, is that Sunday at midnight. Double checking myself. Yes. So it's due Sunday, March 27th by midnight. And the link to submit that is posted to the end of week 10. And the assignment guidelines are posted to the top of week 10. I have the assignment guidelines open, so I'm going to share those with you now. And let me also say I have some allergy stuff going on, so I'm going to do the best I can. I'm armed with cough drops, water, and coffee. But if my voice gives out, or if I take like a coughing fit to where I just can't keep talking, I don't know, we'll regroup. I had a hard time yesterday during class. So, okay, the first part of what you'll see posted to week 10 is a PDF file, and it's this ABC analysis. So you are not completing an ABC analysis. You are analyzing one that has already been completed by a classroom teacher in another setting, right? So names are not used. These are just letters, first names for children. But this isn't, an actual ABC log, which again stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And you can see that it basically goes from February 27th through March 19th. So almost a month of documentation. The teachers are looking at instances of aggression, basically aggression. Yes. And so that in that behavior column, you're going to see where the child named J is aggressing towards other children in the classroom. The work that you're going to do is based on columns A for antecedent, what happened before the behavior, and C, consequence, what happened after the behavior. You're going to look at, what is the function of this behavior? What might the child be gaining from engaging in this behavior? And then we're going to make some recommendations based on our analysis. So I'm sharing now. You should be able to see the ABC analysis document. The first step is just kind of combing through that PDF file and identifying, and today we're going to talk about accidental, expressive, instrumental, and hostile aggression, those different types of aggression. So you're going to kind of comb through and figure out what is what. Hannah, this is due March 27th. And so we're going to spend this week and next week covering this topic in depth, and you should have what you need to get it completed by then.
Thank you.
So combing through the document, figuring out, what type of aggression are we noticing? And then based on the antecedent and consequence then is how you'll look at letter C. So you're going to develop hypotheses for what you think might be contributing to these behaviors. Why are these happening? And that's mostly going to come from probably antecedent, but also maybe consequence, And then we're going to be in part 2 looking for patterns in the behavior. So is it happening at a certain time of day? Is it happening during a particular setting with specific children or staff in the room? And then you have to answer some questions specifically related to the consequences. And then part 3 is where you're going to make your recommendations. And you're looking at changes in general terms to the classroom, to the environment, to the schedule. And this is all based on what you've observed in the document recording the child's behavior. Does anyone have any specific questions up front just looking at this? Be mindful that you need to make a suggestion, give a specific example that states how you're going to implement this suggestion or how the teacher would implement. You need to give a rationale on why, and that's going to draw on the document, right, on the PDF file. So I observed that this behavior was consistently happening at this time of day with this child. So I make a recommendation that the teacher would. But number 4 also asks you to draw on things that you've learned from this class, guidance principles, kind of basic overarching ideas. So you need to relate it specifically to the PDF as well as to our course content, kind of more generally. 2 suggestions. Is this clear as mud to everyone? Okay. And I think once we've had some opportunity to kind of talk through the content from today, and you'll look at some on Thursday asynchronously, and then again first of next week, I think you will have what you need to be successful on this. So I do not have, let me see if I can. I might kind of jump back and forth between the asynchronous content. So the asynchronous PowerPoint that's posted for this week on Thursday is going to have some element of review from what we talk about today, but there's also some new information in there. So make sure that you go through that on your own time. Also, there is an article, and I noticed some of you have already read the article and done the discussion board post. This is your only discussion board post for this course this semester, because again, those have been replaced by the in-person lab assignments. And we'll talk just a bit about that before we leave the call today, because I think, has anyone already had that experience? Did anyone sign up for Monday, hit the ground running after spring break? Okay, great, Maddie. Did you say yes, you have had that?
Oh, this Monday? No, because I have classes on Monday, but
okay,
on the following Monday.
Yeah, I don't think
I have Anderson, so.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think anyone has gone into the room yet for this course, so we'll touch base on that and just give some basic kind of overarching guidance for that experience related to guidance. But yeah, so don't let me forget that. And someone's going today. So yeah, we'll make sure to talk about that briefly before we leave. All right. So I opened up the PowerPoint. It's actually the one that you're going to look at on Thursday. But I want to we've looked at this pyramid, throughout the course And at this point, we've looked at all the elements of the pyramid, right? We understand that those indirect guidance strategies in terms of appropriate expectations based on development, appropriate, expectations of young children, understanding child development, all of that stuff is in place at the most basic foundational level. Then we move into environment. So we have our indoor and outdoor environments that support positive behavior. We talked about time, space, energy, a variety of concepts kind of related to that. We also want to make sure that we have engaging curriculum, engaging activities and materials available for children. That's all indirect guidance. And there was a question on the midterm related, it asked you to contrast guidance and punishment. A lot of you gave answers that were, largely correct, right? That punishment is intended to sort of, teach the child a lesson and doesn't really offer opportunity for learning and that type of thing. But one thing that I want to make sure that we're all clear on is that punishment is typically happening in response to a negative or a challenging behavior. And guidance is also sometimes happening in relation to negative behavior. But guidance is everything that the adults do to prepare the space for children, to provide engaging activities for children. So it goes beyond just addressing negative behavior. Guidance is all the things. And so, it's strategies that we use to help children be successful. Most of what I just described is indirect guidance related to helping set children up for success in the classroom. And then as we move to the top of the pyramid, we see that sometimes we have to use direct guidance to facilitate positive behavior, through verbal or physical gesturing to children. We are anticipating when things might happen. So we're placing our bodies in strategic locations in the classroom. We're being aware that with certain materials and certain children, we might need to be more present or have more adults available to that activity. But at the very top of the pyramid, responding to challenges, that is where this work that we're talking about now comes into play. So this is kind of, it's like last resort when you've got all these other pieces in place and you've tried, facilitating with positive redirection, you've tried to anticipate and be prepared for the challenges, but then the challenges still happen, right? Because we're working with young children. We know this. So how do we respond? Let's define challenging behavior. And so it's any repeated behavior that interferes with learning or engagement in pro-social interactions. So anytime a child is not able to engage with their peers or their materials in a helpful, useful way, we could call a repeated pattern of that behavior a challenging behavior. Of course, there are going to be isolated incidents. Of course, there are going to be moments where children demonstrate frustration or, lack of active engagement in the classroom. It becomes a challenge when it is happening frequently. And, perhaps we don't necessarily see the bigger picture of why it's happening. Or maybe we do see the bigger picture of why it's happening and we're kind of at a loss for how to help guide it in a different direction. It's also really important to note that challenging behaviors are behaviors that are not responsive to developmentally appropriate guidance strategies. So most of the time when children, hit or kick or destroy the property or materials of another child, we can go in and we can say the things that we've been talking about up to this point. We can use those I messages. That was another question on the midterm that a lot of people did not get full credit for. And so if you need to, I believe it's on page 164 of the text, but refer back to that so that you can get a really good sense on what that sounds like and feels like when it's delivered to the child. An I message, first of all, identifies the behavior in question. It then tells the child what was the direct impact of that behavior. So Tyree, you took the train that Henry was using, and now Henry is crying in the train area. It makes me feel worried when I see someone in our classroom crying. And then, so the third part of that is, how does it make the caregiver feel, right? Those are the three parts of the I message. And when we're using strategies like that, or we're using physical redirection, specific verbal guidance, and those things are not working, then we could call this a challenging behavior that we're observing with a child. Also, sometimes it's specifically about intensity and duration, right? So the length of a tantrum, if it goes beyond what is typical for young children, and that, that's not like a hard and fast rule. You're not standing there with a timer for 25 minutes. And if they go beyond 25 minutes, it's challenging. Although I would say that a 25-minute tantrum is in fact challenging. But, you can sort of, you have a baseline of what you would expect a child to be able to kind of come down from. And if it's going above and beyond that baseline of what seems typical for children this age, then you might say, that child's exhibiting a challenging behavior. So you all are going to get into more specifics about challenging behaviors on your own time. And I'm going to shift gears now to talking about those four types. Particularly, we're going to talk about aggression, but we can start with naming some of these challenging behaviors. So teasing other children, disrupting the learning environment. This could be running throughout the room. This could be, let me give you the example of in a preschool classroom, a child going over into the block center and just destroying everything that's being built, like a wrecking ball. Would you consider that a challenging behavior? It's likely going to be disruptive to what's going on in the learning environment, right? Now, in the toddler setting, we wouldn't necessarily think of that as challenging or disruptive. So that's what toddlers do. They build things, they knock them over, they dump things out and fill things up again. That's their work. But at the preschool age group, we would expect to see more active engagement with blocks or materials. And so that's where, again, you have to draw on that foundational knowledge of children and child development to know, is what I'm seeing appropriate, or is it, perhaps outside of that zone of what's appropriate for this age. Destruction of property, attention-seeking behaviors. I've seen everything from, prolonged crying, extravagant tantrums, urinating on oneself, biting oneself. I mean, there's a really wide gamut of attention-seeking behaviors that children can exhibit. One that I would like to point out that can be a challenging behavior and can be attention-seeking and really doesn't look like that on the surface is children who are incredibly withdrawn. So sometimes children shut down, they retreat, they might hide under the table, they might, just do things that are sort of atypical in an effort to either get attention or, my point is just that sometimes the behavior is not loud and overt and, causing a lot of chaos in the classroom. It could be the complete opposite of that, but we don't need to neglect those children. We need to recognize that children who are not kind of behaving in line with the norm, they need our support. Lying, extravagant tales, again, with an understanding of developmental appropriateness. Tattling can be a challenging behavior. I used to ask my children, is this a tattletale or is this a safety tale? I'm interested in safety tales. I'm not interested in tattletales. But if it's something that, I need to be aware of to help keep you or the classroom safe, let me hear it. Swearing, name calling, self-comforting behaviors. I said biting oneself, I've seen masturbation at this age that could be looked at as a challenging behavior if it goes beyond what's like typical exploration of the human body. And then that quiet and withdrawn behavior that I mentioned. I think that one's really important to to notice when it's happening. A couple of weeks from now, we'll talk about ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, and kind of looking at things through a trauma-informed lens. But that's just something to be aware of, that, you know, children react to situations and circumstances in their environment all very differently. And sometimes that withdrawing quietness can be a red flag for us that we need to kind of key in on what's happening with this child. So thinking now specifically about aggression, because that is one of the challenging behaviors that we will see the most of in an early childhood setting. Probably the most important thing to recognize is that when you are responding to an aggressive behavior from a child, you have to model non-aggressive behavior. That is the ultimate time to keep your cool, right? Because if we go over and start barking at the child or physically grabbing the child and trying to separate children, we are being aggressive. We are being aggressive and trying to stop aggression, and that just doesn't work. And so this is, again, where some of those tools like conscious discipline, mindfulness, breathing exercises, all those things that we as adults can do to keep ourselves regulated. And there's a lot of research out there, very interesting research that's, it talks about the mirror effect and how, especially with young children, but even into the preschool age, children mirror our emotions, right? Even on sort of like a subconscious level, they can match their breathing to your breathing. If you're showing gentle facial cues, they will soften their facial expressions. And so it's really important to approach the child and the behavior in the right way, which is in a calm, supportive manner. We don't want to have aggressive materials in the classroom. So, toy guns, plastic swords, those types of things, typically not done, but just kind of something to be aware of. Gunplay is like a whole lecture in and of itself. And lots of places have their own sort of policies and ideas around gunplay. I just used to always tell my children, if it makes someone feel unsafe, we can't play that way, because that's not respecting everyone in our classroom. And so, pointing sticks at other children and pretending to shoot. I would ask the child who was getting pointed at, do you feel safe in this play? But having actual guns and things that lend themselves to aggressive play is not a good idea. And then the other, this third point is related to things we've been talking about all along, right? In terms of how we set up the environment. We need to make sure children have enough space to move around freely, that they're not fighting and vying for property in the classroom. So property in terms of space and materials. And that's all work that we do on the back end to kind of set them up for success. We've talked about this before, but kind of the idea with noticing positive behavior is that what you give your energy to, you get more of, right? So if you want to see children doing pro-social behaviors, engaging in positive relationships with one another, then when you see that happening, recognize it, comment on it, and you will get more of that. And the last point is that, just like I said, with gunplay, if it makes someone feel unsafe, we can't have it here. I use the language with my children in all the classrooms that I've ever been in, and my own children at home. My number one job is to keep you safe. That is what I'm here for. And so, aggression towards another person, aggression towards the stuff in our classroom, I just cannot let you do those things, because it's not safe for you or the other people. And so, we have to send that really clear message that there's a line from a movie, this aggression will not stand. That's what I want to say right now. But we just cannot have aggression in the classroom. So we're gonna spend some time now kind of unpacking these 4 different types of aggression. And again, remember, these are on the ABC analysis form. So you'll need to be aware of what these look like, how they come across in the classroom, so that you can analyze what types of aggression you're seeing in that document. Accidental aggression. This is obviously unintentional, when other children get hurt in the process of play. So it might look like you step on a child's foot when you're playing and the other child, abruptly breaks down in tears. Backing into a block structure when you're playing in that center and knocking it down on accident. It's accidental aggression. How do we respond appropriately? We diffuse the situation. And I think the rule of thumb is to always address the victim first. You want to make sure that the child who has been hurt, who has had their property hurt, they are okay first. That's what you do. First step. Make sure they're, able to articulate their feelings. And then you explain, I saw what happened. He didn't do it on purpose, but we can still, talk about, and I would have children say things like, please be careful for my body, or please watch out for the work that I'm doing in blocks. Something to help them feel validated and like they have a voice in the situation, even though it was an accident, You also want to point out to the aggressor, to the child who had the accident, that what happened had an impact on this other child. So we don't just blindly go through the world, knocking things awry and stepping on other people without stopping to acknowledge, oh my goodness, I did not mean to do that. Please excuse me, or whatever. And then ask the aggressor to help repair the damage. I would also add here, make sure that's okay with the other child, because sometimes children want help rebuilding their block structure. And sometimes they might be like, no, thank you. I would just like to get back to this by myself. And that's okay too. But if the child would like help or would like some sort of support from the other child, it's a good idea to kind of help them resolve the conflict together. The main thing is that we address both parties, we acknowledge what happened, and we talk about how we're going to move forward and perhaps do things differently the next time. Any questions or specific thoughts on this? Okay, these are accidents that happen, and accidents happen often. All right, the second type of aggression then is expressive aggression. This is, I mentioned some of these before, when like biting yourself or another person could be an example of expressive aggression. It is a pleasurable sensory experience for the aggressor. They are not really intending to hurt someone. They just got to get it out, And so sometimes really young children might be swinging their arms through space, biting themselves or another child. They get, so it's like they have too much emotion in their body and they just have to let it out, and it comes out physically and it may hurt another person. That's an example of expressive aggression. It could also be when, particularly with, toddlers, 3-year-olds, they're just like so excited, such big energy moving through space, that they knock into another child and knock them down, or they, knock into a block structure and it falls over. They themselves are expressing some sort of emotional response, and in the process, another child or the child's work gets hurt. Excuse me. We have some response suggestions, redirection, appropriate expression of emotion. So you might move the child to a space where they have more room to do what they're doing. If it's an example like biting, you might give them something like a teething ring or a chewy to, get that out on. Another thing that I've seen be really successful here is like heavy work. So taking the child outside and letting them fill up a bucket with dirt and move the dirt around, or pushing wagons with other children in them. Sometimes children need that sort of big body physical sensory input, and we have to think of appropriate ways to offer them those experiences so that we see less expressive aggression. And then the same strategies, obviously, of talking through the conflict if they've hurt another child, those always apply. Questions related to expressive aggression. Okay. The third type is instrumental aggression. Instrumental aggression is when children are engaged in a dispute over property, space, rights in the classroom. It's not premeditated. There's no deliberate intention to hurt another person. Children are just fighting over space and materials. We saw some examples of this in the midterm questions where you had to rewrite those observations of what happened. A child taking a train out of another child's hand, someone taking a toy out of a child's hand in the sandbox. Those are all instrumental aggression examples, right? This is the most common aggressive behavior that we see in children, toddler to preschool age. Does anyone have thoughts on why? You can use the chat or you can shout it out if you're willing to do that.
Partially because like they haven't, especially with toddlers, they haven't like grasped the understanding of what sharing is yet, and like how to ask when I can do them. So like then like the teacher guiding be like, X kid ask this child, may I play with this toy after you are done using this toy? Can I have my turn? And like teaching them that way can have better understanding.
Absolutely. So lack of understanding about how we even do this work of taking turns is not necessarily in place, especially for those 2 to 3 year old children, right? Sometimes there's a language issue where they might even understand how to do it, but they don't have the language skills yet to say all those things that Grace just articulately said for us. They just want what they want when they want it, you know? And then that want what I want when I want it piece is kind of another component of it. So children this age are not necessarily known for regulatory skills, right? That's something that is developing. And so even if they know I need to ask for a turn, and even if they have the language to say, you know, can I have a turn with that when you're finished, they might just not have the executive functioning to pull that off, because they want what they want and they see it and they grab it. They don't have, the term for it is like not coming into my brain. Well, it's like I don't know. I can't think of the term. Sorry, guys. But it's self-regulation, a lack of self-regulation, right? And so that's why we see instrumental aggression happening frequently across most children in early childhood settings. So the response, and this is pretty much like the conflict mediation that we saw in instrumental aggression. In accidental aggression, excuse me. But this is really specific. And what's most important here is to help the children generate alternatives and do that problem solving work, so that, you know, Grace pointed out, they might not know this stuff. This is how we teach them, right? In the moment, when it comes up, we say, oh, so-and-so, you know, it looks like you wanted a turn with that, but child Z was still using it. What can we do to help work this out? Get ideas from the children, have them agree on a solution. We watched some video on those solution kit ideas. There are lots of them. So they could play together. They could share and take turns. They could play with, the child could decide to play with something different if they don't want to wait. There's a lot of options there besides just wait your turn. But they might want to wait their turn, and then we can draw on timers. We can have children sign up on a waiting list for materials that are kind of hot topic items in the classroom. But the main thing is we want them to come up with solutions to this problem so that we can help reinforce the problem-solving process. And then we don't just walk away and leave them to figure it out on their own. If we say, you're going to get a turn in 5 minutes, it's our responsibility to monitor that time or, do what we need to do to help them follow through on their agreement, right? Because that's our work. They need our support. And then the fourth type is hostile aggression. Hostile aggression is sort of the pinnacle of aggression, if you will. This is where the goal is actually to inflict physical or psychological pain on another person. Hostile aggression looks like purposeful attacks, either using physical action or, mean, hurtful words. And it's in an effort to make one child feel more powerful than another. Sometimes we see hostile aggression as completely unpredictable. And I hear parents or teachers say, that the other child didn't do anything. They did not do anything to deserve this or to provoke this. It's just one child exhibiting aggression kind of on the rest of the classroom or on, people and things. This type of hostile aggression can be called bullying. And this, we're gonna see a few video clips and think about the idea of communicating these challenging behaviors to families. This is the type of aggression that you have to be the most careful with, right? Because we do not want to come to a family and tell them that they have a bully for a child, we do want to address hostile aggression when it's occurring, but we need to make sure we have clear documentation, that we have done our due diligence, that we know sort of, what's at play here. So are there specific times of the day? Are there specific daily routines, materials, whatever? And so this is where the ABC analysis, and there are other types of behavioral records and documentation that you can use. But for the purposes of this class, I want you to be familiar with the ABC analysis. So this is where that type of thing would come into play, right? We have a child who is exhibiting hostile aggression, and we want to figure out, first of all, kind of what's the function or why is the behavior happening? And then how do we help prevent it in the future? All right. Can anyone think of an instance where you have observed a child engaging in aggressive behavior, and would you be willing to kind of share along these points with us, either at Lucy Brock if you've been there, in a setting where you may work? So what aggressive behaviors have you observed? What do you think they're trying to communicate? What type of aggression did you see?
I'll go.
Thanks, Maddie.
I did an internship at a pre-K classroom in my hometown. So they were basically 4 and 5-year-olds. So they're like the preschool age at Lucy Brock, but I don't really know how to explain it. Like they were in the school curriculum, so there was definitely different rules there.
Right. Like an NC pre-K classroom.
Yeah. But they have a Lego table, like one of those ones that slides out from underneath and like has the Lego blocks everywhere. And it's the one that has like the little dinosaurs all over it. But just for reference, one of the kids is the biggest kid in the classroom is towers over the rest of them. He's a very large child. He's a lot heavier than the rest of them. He's a lot taller than the rest of them. And then he was playing with the smallest kid in the classroom, who's, you would mistake him for a toddler, like a 2-3-year-old. He's very little. But they were fighting over one of the dinosaurs. It got a little bit out of hand, and the little one ended up on top of his back, and the big one was on his hands and knees, and the little one had him in like a chokehold and was on top of his back and kind of pulling his hair, fighting over this dinosaur. And and I don't know that's the first time I've ever seen the little one do something like that. And the big one had a tendency to antagonize. So
maybe it's important to kind of know that backstory, that perhaps the larger child has the other children may perceive him as threatening, aggressive, whatever, because he might be more antagonistic and doing maybe some hostile aggression. But what type of aggression then does it sound like Maddie just described? Children are fighting over dinosaurs.
Instrumental.
Yes, I don't know who said that, but thank you. So function of the behavior was to get a turn with the materials, right, that another child was using. So that is an instance of instrumental behavior. How did the adults in the situation respond, Maddie?
We had never had anything happen like that, and it was I was the one who noticed it, but I was busy. So and I was an intern. I wasn't a teacher, and I wasn't really equipped to handle the situation. So I kind of hollered at the teacher aide, because she was the closest one. She was doing arts and craft, and she just literally picked that little one up, like scooped him up and pulled him off of the big one. And then she took, and the big one turned around, and they were just gonna keep wailing on each other. So she took both of them outside. I don't know what happened after that, but I just know they didn't play with each other anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of, so I think there are times when a more sort of slow, like I want to go and approach the child and try to talk this out approach is warranted. But that is not the case when children are literally, connected to one another, hurting each other. The job then is to just separate them and get them safe. And then we can talk about it, And I don't know what the teachers said to the children. I do want to say that the end goal is never to have other children not be friends with one another. That from my perspective, that's not the goal. But children might naturally decide, I don't want to play with that person for a while because they just really hurt me, and I'm, protecting myself in that way. So I don't think we should ever make children play together. But I have heard language like, you're not going to play with them anymore today because you guys weren't getting along, and I don't think that that's the best approach either, because we don't want to say that a one-time instance of something bad happening with another person is a one and done, and you just write that person off, that doesn't necessarily send the right message either. So I think there's a really fine line in terms of how we navigate that moving forward. I would say if you have the space, the staff, keep a staff person kind of close to both of those children, so that if they come back together in that day, you can really be monitoring and making sure that they're safe and getting along. But yeah, thank you so much for that example. And I think that's, that's like the stuff we see happening all day, every day in a preschool classroom, right? So I'm going to pause on what I'm talking about right now, just to sort of talk for a few minutes then about when you go into the classroom at Lucy Brock, right? Because I think Maddie pointed out something important, that she said, I was an intern in the classroom, and I didn't really feel like it was my role to, jump in and really handle that. And there will probably be circumstances like that for you as a lab participant at Lucy Brock. So the expectation is not that you have had half of a course of guidance 2102 and that you go in and how to like rock it all. If you feel like you are presented with circumstances where you can touch a child on the shoulders and orient them to the sink when everyone's trying to wash hands to go outside or to sit down for a mealtime. Use appropriate guidance strategies, those verbal redirections, like, oh, it looks like everyone's sitting down to circle time. You want to come sit beside me? Those types of things are totally appropriate. But if children are grabbing one another and pulling each other's hair and scrapping it out in the floor, don't get involved in that. Defer to the people who know those children. I don't expect that you'll see anything like that. I'm just drawing on the example that we were just given. But my point is, if you don't feel comfortable in knowing how to handle this, whatever situation you see, then just go and get a teacher's attention and say, there's something going on over in the block center. I could use your help. And then stay and observe how that teacher handles it so that you can understand what the appropriate guidance strategy might be, I believe Dr. Anderson mentioned on the call when she was here, but the best way to get to play with these children naturally and in sort of a really authentic way, and B, to get the experience that you want to get out of this, is to go into the classroom, pretend like you're one of the children, and just kind of immerse yourself in playing with the toys that they have available to them. If you sit down and start building something in the block center, they will come to you with interest, and they will want to actively engage with you. You don't want to go in and, present yourself as some new novel thing, although they will notice that you're new and novel, and you'll get attention that first time or two that you're in there. But by the third or fourth experience, you just kind of want to seamlessly enter, wash your hands, and then start playing and see what happens. Does anyone have questions or concerns about the lab component? Get to know your classroom teachers. This is high quality childcare at Lucy Brock exists out of the fact that those people are there to serve you guys. They want you to have a good experience. They want you to see what you come to see. And out of that, children have really rich experiences as well. But, the work that they're doing is largely for you all. So take advantage of that and connect with them while you're in their space. Ask questions.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Are we going to be expected to observe, or are we just purely there to just be in that moment? Or are sometimes some weeks we're going to need to write notes about something? Or
so you have those 4 observation reflections. They're kind of all geared toward different things. One of them is geared towards an adult acknowledging a child's work or behavior. Another is geared towards how did an adult address a challenging behavior. So before you go in, I would review those and have kind of the 4 things that you're looking for, as prompts in your mind. When you're in the classroom though, you might have a little notepad or something to jot down on. You should not be taking photographs or video of the children, although I don't think for the purposes of this course that's necessary. So just, you might jot down a note or something like that to help you kind of remember what happened, but you're going to want to then go and write these reflections as quickly as you can based on, what you've observed. But the purpose of your time there is really just to integrate into the classroom and to practice the principles that we have been discussing in this class, and to observe for appropriate guidance strategies and things like that being used kind of in the moment. So you're doing both, Destiny, you're observing, but also really integrating into the classroom. And I apologize, I kind of caught myself there with the cell phone thing, just because this is the first time that I've had this class going in there, and I'm not sure about the protocol around all of that. I mean, I know for some classes you have to take photos and things like that, but I'm not asking you to do that for this class. So I don't know that you should do that, if that makes sense. Did you have a question, Grace?
I was just going to say that I'm also in Dr. Anderson's class right now, like Maddie mentioned, and We do have to take a lot of pictures and videos for that class. So like they wouldn't be alarmed if like you wanted to take.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess my question is, did you have to sign anything beyond just the confidentiality form?
No, we didn't.
Okay. Yeah. So then parents have signed off on the waiver that says that we can do that work. Yeah. I wasn't really clear on that. So if you feel like that would benefit you, and you might check with the teachers, you know, for me personally, when I'm working with children, video data from the interaction is like, it's just super useful to me because I see a lot of classrooms and I go through a lot of video data. So I kind of have to go back and rewatch to get what I need. So if that is appropriate and, you know, necessary, but the reflections are not asking you to describe anything too major for this class. So, but yeah, I think open lines of communication with the classroom teachers is the main thing. Any other thoughts on that while we're talking about it? Sweet. Just got good news. Okay. So we're going to probably spend, well, let's talk about that idea of communicating this stuff to families, right? The main thing to think about is when children are engaging in challenging behaviors, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It impacts the entire classroom. If they're in a classroom setting, it impacts their whole family, right? Children do not exist in a vacuum. And so when we are having these communications with families about these types of behaviors, we need to consider that they already know that their child is doing things that are presenting challenges. I'm sure it's not just happening at school. And what we don't want to do is make families feel further isolated or like they're being blamed for their child's behavior because they, you know, may feel just as at a loss. And so we want to communicate that we are partnering with them and not, you know, casting blame on them. Do you guys remember this fellow, Brendan? I'm not going to show the video clip again since I think everybody sort of saw it the first time, but Brennan was having a hard time transitioning into the classroom after, you know, outdoor time. And so we watched that as an example of when you might have to restrain a child, right, to get him out of the parking lot area and get him safely indoors. This video clip, it's just a couple minutes, but we're going to hear from Brendan's family because I think this gives you a different lens to kind of view that behavior through, and also how you would communicate with his family about his behaviors at school once you hear their kind of take on things.
Went out anywhere, just going out. We just decided to stay home because it was easier, or taking turns going out, or I wait for you to come home from work. And
we couldn't even go in and out of Publix or Walmart because we couldn't get through the door without having a tantrum. Certainly couldn't go to a restaurant and sit down and have dinner for a half hour. Just simple everyday life things we couldn't do.
We became isolated, not even eating dinner at home or giving the kids baths or simple things at home. So we ended up just developing routines around Brenton, and that was what we did. You know, I think everybody revolved around him.
I guess what made Brendan tough before PBS was that we had no way to communicate with him. We didn't know what he wanted. He was frustrated. We were frustrated, and it was just a lack of communication of understanding why he was doing what he was doing, and then how to resolve it. That's probably what made it the toughest for me. So she just didn't know just how to communicate with him.
I think it was so hard when he would just fall down, and I had to carry him in places, carry him out of places. We were spectacles. People just watched us, they judged us.
What did you notice in their sort of relaying of their experience with Brendan?
I think they're feeling a little hopeless, like they really don't even know what to do themselves, and they're just like at a loss because it's challenging for them, and they just literally are trying their best.
Yeah. And they said before we found PBS stands for positive behavioral support. And so this was them looking back on what it was like before they had some interventions in place. And yes, I think they were, you know, hopeless, isolated. I mean, they basically said, like, we took turns staying home with him and we never went out with him because it was such an undertaking to just do everyday normal life stuff, like go sit in a restaurant or go out to the grocery store. That's a really, really hard place to be, you know? And so what we as providers, you know, do not want to do is to compound that with judgment or blame or, you know, negative perceptions of the child. And so I don't know if in this class we've talked about a strengths-based approach. I think you'll see this come up in the PowerPoint that you review on Thursday, but excuse me, my rule of thumb, anytime I'm communicating, I use this with my own children. I use it with parents. I use it with staff when I was the director at a childcare center. My rule of thumb is that I always start with something positive. I notice something that I appreciate about the child, something that the child is really good at, you know, whatever the case may be. And I lead in with that, right? So that I've already communicated, I do not dislike your child, and I am here to partner with you and to help. Here's what we, you know, need to discuss after I've already said, here are the things I love about your child. And that also is a practice that helps you, you know, develop those positive feelings towards children who do present with really challenging behaviors, because sometimes that's hard. So you know, it's a practice of noticing the positives and kind of cultivating that idea of the child in your mind as positive with challenging behaviors, if that makes sense. And so we're not going to do this practice with a partner. We would do it in small groups if we were together. But what I just said, positive observations, initially specifically describe what has been observed. So when you communicate to families, this is when you're going to draw on documentation and not just generally talk about, you know, this is a problem that we're having, like give them clear, concrete examples. And then you want to get their input, talk about what do they think is going to help, what strategies might they recommend based on their knowledge of their child as the expert on that child. And then the common goal is to help the child be successful in school, right? To help the child be successful in their peer relationships, et cetera. And so that's kind of how you keep the conversation framed around how do we help this child be successful in this setting? And that's going to look different for every child based on every different circumstance, pretty much, you know? I think it's important to watch this video because this is going to lead us into the ABC analysis work. So
ADHD,
let me know. Can you all see this?
Chrome extension. But no, by all means, go ahead.
No.
Skip the ad. Save.
Okay, hang on. Now you should be able to see it. Okay. All right, we're just going to watch 5 minutes of this video. It's going to talk you through specifics of the ABC analysis, and then we're going to do a little bit of hands-on practice with it before we leave.
Hi, and welcome to the Smart Classroom Behavior Series. In this session, we'll be covering the ABCs of behavior. For this ABCs of behavior section, we will cover the following. We'll identify the 3 elements of the ABC analysis, describe each element, and practice completing an ABC analysis. Let's look at the cartoon. The cartoon shows a common experience that happens at home and in the classroom. We have a behavior that occurred, and now we have to figure out what happened and what to do about it. And this is where an ABC analysis can help. An ABC analysis can help us because an ABC analysis looks at what happens before, during, and after a target behavior occurs. An ABC analysis has 3 elements. A for antecedent, B for behavior, and C for consequence. Those are the ABCs of behavior. The A in the ABC stands for antecedent. This refers to what is happening before the behavior occurs. It involves 3 elements. The first element is the setting. Where is the behavior taking place? Is the behavior occurring in the classroom, out on the playground, or in the cafeteria? Within the classroom, you can even look at areas such as your home center, science area, or reading area, because those are also individual settings within the classroom. Oftentimes, behavior is caused by something in the environment, and if we can find out that piece in the environment and change it, we can often remove the behavior. The second element is events. When is this behavior happening? During what time of the day is this behavior occurring? Is it occurring during morning announcements? Is it occurring during group time, work time, during center time, during a meal or a snack? Sometimes we can figure out why a behavior is occurring if we can see what's going on at the same time as the behavior. If we can change one of those elements, sometimes the behavior goes away on its own as well. The last element is interactions. Who is the child interacting with at the time the behavior occurs? Is it with another child? Is it with the teacher? Or is the child on their own? Oftentimes, certain behaviors occur with other individuals. And if we can figure that out, we can either change how the dynamic of that interaction or prohibit that interaction from happening. The B in ABC stands for behavior. The behavior component involves describing the behavior as it's happening now. There are 3 things you need to do when observing behavior. The first thing you need to do is be specific. Specific means you focus only on the target behavior. For example, if the target behavior you want to address is name calling, then looking at running in the classroom or hitting is going to take your focus away. The second thing you need to do is be detailed. When the behavior occurs, record everything that is said or done. For example, instead of saying the child called the teacher a name, you would say, the child stood next to the teacher and said, "You're a dummy," in a loud voice. The third thing you need to do is be objective. Objective means you record facts and not your opinion or interpretations of the behavior. For example, instead of saying he kicked the child viciously, you would say he kicked the child hard in the leg. Having specific, detailed, and objective observations will give you good information to use when coming up with behavior strategies. The C in ABC stands for consequence. Consequences are what happens after a behavior occurs. When we hear the word consequence, we automatically think of punishment. However, in an ABC analysis, the consequence is actually a response by the person to the behavior. The person's response could be a punishment, but not always. So we need to look for 3 different responses. The first response is by the teacher or the adult in the situation, if there is one. How does the teacher address the behavior? In what way did the teacher respond? Did the teacher give a punishment? Did the teacher redirect the behavior? Or did the teacher not notice the behavior and did nothing? The other person involved in behavior is probably another child. What does each child do? For example, with name calling, the child that did the name calling, how does the child who was called the name respond? The last response we look for is the environment. While a response from the environment is rare, it can happen. An example would be a child bouncing a ball against the wall. If the ball bounces back and hits the child in the face, that's the environment responding. It's important to look at how each of these individuals responds to the behavior, because it could give us clues in how to address the behavior in the future, or even maybe that we're missing a behavior because we don't see it. So how do we conduct an ABC analysis? As teachers, it is difficult to observe.
Okay, so I just wanted you to hear her describe the components of the A, B, and the C, right? The components of A are settings, events, and interactions. Those are the things that you're looking for in terms of what came before. With the behavior, she talked about those specific, objective, detailed observations. You've had some practice doing that, and that's what you're going to draw on when you think about how you would write up an ABC analysis. It's specific, detailed, and objective. And then the consequence piece, remember, it can come from the teacher, but it can also come from other children or from the space itself, in the example that she gave with, the ball bouncing back into the child's face. But whatever comes after the behavior in question is looked at as the consequence. Did anyone have any thoughts as you were watching that you want to share with us? All right, I am opening up a couple documents. We're gonna first look at, because the ABC analysis assignment asks you to give those different types of aggression that you see. I want to do just a little bit of practice thinking about this. Can you all see example of aggressive behaviors? Okay, so this is on the course page. You can work through it on your own if you choose to. You do not have to. But let's look at a couple of examples here. Number 1 says Linda and Sheldon both want the rolling pin. They begin grabbing and shoving. As they struggle to take it from each other, Sheldon slaps Linda and Linda shoves Sheldon away. What do you think the aggression is? Is Linda's behavior, so Linda shoves Sheldon after being slapped by him, and Sheldon slapped her in an effort to, they're both trying to get after the rolling pin. What types of aggression?
Would hers be hostile aggression? Because she's like trying to hurt him back.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about Sheldon's?
Oh, his is instrumental.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So Linda, can you explain to me why why Linda would be considered hostile versus like just a consequence to like being slapped?
So, well, and a hostile is with an intent to hurt the other child, right? And I'm gonna go back to the 4 types just to kind of get a visual on them too. So I think it started in that they're both, it's instrumental initially for both of them, right? They're fighting over the rolling pin. It becomes hostile when the intent changes. Yes. And so the intent is no longer necessarily to get the rolling pin. The intent is to hurt one another. And we might say that Sheldon slapping her was hostile. Without really observing the behavior, and the same behavior could be multiple types of aggression. I think the initial grabbing and fussing over the rolling pin, I would call instrumental. And then I might call both of these hostile aggression because they've shifted from their attention being on the rolling pin to really just physically hurting one another. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is all pretty subjective, right? It's open to your interpretation because, again, the same behavior could be either, it could be any of these types, really. So you have to like watch it happen and kind of think it through. Let's do number 4. Today is the first day that Philip has mastered scissors. As he cuts paper, he sings softly under his breath, snip, snip, snip. A few minutes later, a howl goes up from Jean. Philip has cut her picture too. Jean grabs her picture and shoves Philip. Was Philip's aggression
accidental?
Accidental. It could also perhaps be this expressive. He might just really be into the scissor, he's like so engrossed in that cutting experience that he just keeps cutting, but either way it was an accident, right? It was accidental. And then did Jean aggress against him, or she grabs her picture and shoves Philip?
Wouldn't that be hostile since her attention was then shifted towards hurting Philip?
Yes, yes, she is acting out of anger and retaliation, right? Okay. Again, that's posted to the course page if you want to take a further look at it. It's pretty nuanced. And so if you, as you're doing this work, if you have, you know, you think it might be this type of aggression or this type of aggression, make some notes that justify your rationale. And then, you know, I think anytime you can articulate your thinking as to why you know, if you understand the different types of aggressions, I'm not going to count it wrong if you look at it through a different lens than another person might look at it, if that makes sense. Where did okay, so it's in the PowerPoint. I can, the rest of the stuff, I'm talking to myself right now, sorry guys. I was looking for a Word document. There's another Word doc posted to the course page that has some practice with the idea of practicing through the ABC analysis, but I have some of them embedded in this PowerPoint. So let's look at this sample. Gabriella is playing in her room. Her mom tells her, "Come on, Gabriella, it's time to go to school." Her mom pulls on her arm to try to get Gabriella to stand up and go to the car. Gabriella yells, screams, is kicking her toys. Her mother says, "Okay, 5 more minutes, but then we must go." Gabriella's mom walks away and Gabriella continues playing with her toys. What is the antecedent? Well, let's talk about what's the behavior. If we were doing an ABC log, what would we write in the behavior column based on this? Gabriella yells, screams, and begins kicking at her toys, right? That's the part, that's the challenging behavior. So what's the antecedent? Her mom comes in her room and says, "Come on, Gabriella, it's time to go to school," pulls on her arm and tries to get her to go to the car, right? That's what happened first. Then we saw Gabriella yell, scream, and began kicking. The consequence then is that her mother says, "Okay, 5 more minutes, but then we have to go." And Gabriella gets to keep playing with her toys. Do you see the A, the B, and the C? So what if we're talking about the function of Gabriella yelling, screaming, and kicking at her toys in response to her mom telling her it's time to go to school? What was the function of that behavior potentially? She's trying to avoid having to get in the car and go to school, right? And she possibly has learned that if I behave this way, my mom gives me 5 more minutes to play with my toys. And if she hasn't already learned it, she's learning it in this moment, you know? Kicking, yelling, and screaming gets me 5 more minutes of playtime. That's what we just saw. We got one more, maybe. Tim is riding a trike on the playground bike path. He sees a child move to the sandbox where he has just finished building a new roadway. He leaps off his trike and tackles the child. He hits the child. An adult comes over to intervene. She comforts the child that was hit and scolds Tim by saying, "That's not nice." Tim goes back to the sandbox and continues to build on his roadway. So the behavior was that Tim tackled and hit the child, right? The antecedent, what happened first, was that a child moved to the sandbox near something Tim had just built. And the consequence was that the adult intervened, scolded Tim, and comforted the other child. Tim got to continue building his roadway. We might say that the function of Tim's behavior was to obtain access to continue building his roadway. And so you can see from these examples how it becomes very, very important when we're dealing with challenging behaviors to make sure that our consequence communicates what we want it to communicate. And that is that, you know, hostility, aggression does not get you what you want. And in neither one of these instances has that been communicated, right? So we have to think then about making recommendations to the adults. How might we handle this differently? Because if the child gets what they're after, then they learn that this type of behavior gets me what I want. Okay. We will spend a little more time on this before this assignment is due. Everybody, yes, please type your name into the chat. I thank you for sticking with me this whole time, and I'm glad my voice held out. And I will see you all next week on Tuesday. Make sure you get that discussion post in by the end of the weekend, okay? And you should respond to one other person. That's written out on there though. Thank you. Have a good rest of your week.